we have more similarities, and this is an opportunity for us to support each other and hopefully have a tool for each of you to leave today's event with. I'll start. I am Kara Bilicki. I am a lead at Big Brothers Big Sisters. We have started these coffee and conversations as an opportunity to support our volunteers, support our families, but also the community at large. This is an opportunity for us to hopefully have people learn more about Big Brothers Big Sisters, but more importantly, support people in the journey of life. I will start the session before I introduce our guest speaker with a land acknowledgement, and then we will start the session and I'll do an introduction of what the topic and who our guest speaker is today. We acknowledge that we live, work, and gather on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation and Stakota Nakota nations. This land is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We are grateful to be here and to walk together in the spirit of reconciliation. So today's Coffee and Conversations the topic is grief. Just to give you some context, the topics are selected through our frontline workers. They are their main connection with our families and our volunteers. And the topics that are presented at each Coffee and Conversation is an area that has been expressed to us through the matches and the volunteers of something that they would like some more information on and support. As guests, we do want to hear more from you. So if there is a topic that you would like more information on, if you'd like a part 2 on grief, please come speak to Katie, who is a staff member. I'm throwing her under the bus. Myself or Stephen, who is the support worker today, and we'd be happy to help facilitate an engaged learning session for you that on a topic of interest for you. So that brings me to Shanna. Shanna Shepherd is currently the director of Children's Grief Center in Calgary. She has nearly 20 years of clinical counseling experience and 10 years of leadership experience in the field of child-adolescent therapy with a focus on grief and loss, development and attachment, trauma, neurodiversity, and therapeutic play. Shanna leads dynamic clinical counseling team and with a commitment to excellence and devotion to supporting children, teens, and their families who are navigating grief after a death. So I'm just going to get started and jump right into the questions. Like I said, this is very informal. We will have a question period at the end, but if there is a question based off the topic that we're currently discussing, please put up your hand and we'd be more than happy to address the questions. The more engaged we are, the better the conversation and the better support we can provide to each other. Okay? Thank you, Shanna, for coming. We appreciate having you here. As we all get to know each other a little bit better, can you tell a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in supporting people who have experienced loss and are going through grief?
I'll start with a little bit about myself. It's always still weird to hear your bio read in the third person, but the little part that I sometimes add to the end of that is I'm an American transplant to Canada when I came for university. So I often say the US birthed me, but Canada raised me. And proud to be Canadian. And I live here in Calgary with my partner and my 2 kids who are 17 and 15, and our Cavapoo, who is the center of our house. Do you know what a Cavapoo is? Like a little dog. It's like a poodle-y mix thing. And she runs the show at our house. And this is my favorite season. So summer finds me, I don't go on vacation. People always say, like, where are you going away to? I'm like, my back porch. So I just bake in the sun in the backyard. So that's a little bit about me just as a human. I probably, like many of you, have a story of grief and loss that drew me to the work that I do. I sometimes bring his picture actually now, so you won't really be able to see it, but I started incorporating him into the pictures of him into some of the work that I do. But my beloved and funny and creative and athletic and rebellious brother, who was also quite traumatized from some experiences in his life, lost his life to drugs when I was 19 and he was 22. And so that probably set me on the path of actually becoming a therapist. And then grief has been my journey of grief and recognizing how life-altering it has been. it's probably motivated me to learn to accompany other people who are navigating that. I often say that grief's an identity project. And so it's a privilege to be with other people who are navigating the change in who they are and how they engage in the world. And so I still am actually, my brother's been dead 22 years, I think. And so still changing, still having my own identity shaped by grief. So yeah, that's probably what brought me here.
Thank you, Shanna. I've also experienced a personal loss, and I remember going to counseling and the counselor saying, you joined a club that you never wanted to join. So I appreciate that we are all here today for a club that we may have never wanted to join, but we're here together. And I would like us to lean into each other for this opportunity. I also recognize that this is a sensitive subject, so please listen to yourself, listen to your soul, and if you need to take some moment for yourself, please do so. If you need to stick around afterwards and connect with Shanna and myself from Big Brothers Big Sisters, absolutely please do so. This is a safe space for all of us, and for you most importantly. So we're going to dig, oh sorry, yes.
So I was a caregiver for my mom, and the Caregivers Alberta is a great organization. But what I'm thinking about grief is my daughter doesn't see her mom, and that's grief. So there's living grief and there's passed on grief. Do we talk a little bit about that?
We do. So we have an actual question similar to that situation, variation of, but that is absolutely part of grief, 100%.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay. Can everyone hear me?
The mic's not working.
I didn't have it on my face, Roz. That's why.
There it is.
I'll be better. So Shanna, can you please tell us and help us understand the different stages of grief and how they show up in different ages? This is a big topic, and I think from my own perspective, one of the most challenging things to navigate as grieving as a family.
Okay, it's a great question. And so sometimes when I do a conversation like this, but especially a presentation, I warm us up with some agree or disagrees about grief and myths about grief. And one of those is that there are stages of grief. So I love the question because it's really wide open for me to get to kind of bust a myth, which is that there are stages of grief. That's a myth. And if you are bereaved, so I didn't catch your name, sorry. Jay, did I get that right? As Jay was kind of saying, there's different types of losses, but there's also, our culture has adopted a pop psychology idea about grief and the stages of grief, which help us get some handles and have some explanations for the feelings that are just probably beyond description. So what I would say is, if you've heard of the 5 stages of grief, people here have heard of the 5 stages. Is that what you meant when you asked me? Okay. So the 5 stages of grief were actually developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That's the woman who kind of developed the 5 stages of grief for people who were dying, not for people who had experienced a death and were bereaved. So Jay was talking about some different kinds of loss, which is a bit more of what we're going to call ambiguous loss. I think in your email to me, you called it life losses. Did you call it life losses? That was really beautiful. So losses that don't have as much resolution, and that are really ongoing, living losses, I think Jay had said. And so the 5 stages of grief were developed for people who were dying, not for the people who were grieving them on the other side of it. So if you've grieved, I think you probably know those aren't a great fit for you. And there are some people who they're helpful for, and if they're helpful for you, that's fantastic. But they're not helpful for a lot of people because it doesn't describe maybe the chaotic nature of grief, that you're bouncing all around all kinds of emotions. And so honestly, in this moment, I don't even know if I could name you the 5 stages of grief in the proper order anymore. What is it? Denial, somebody help me out.
Anger.
Denial, anger, negotiation, what did you say? Bartering, bargaining. Anyone else? I've plugged those out of my brain. So, the partner that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed her model with, his name is David Kessler, and you might have heard he's developed a 6 stage. called Finding Meaning. And so they've tried to sort of adapt the 5 stages of grief to be more reflective of what grievers experience. So if you find that helpful, that's great. I've had before kids who come in and that is something that they relate to, and I'm like, that's amazing. Let's use that. And then what are maybe other things that aren't in this book that are also part of your grief journey? And so I would say there are no 5 stages of grief, but I did bring, with your question, I brought you something else to kind of hold how you're thinking about your grief. And so this is what we would say at the Children's Grief Center, that grief really is, it's not about stages. That's a really old way of thinking about bereavement, but it is about moving between loss and restoration. Loss and restoration. So adaptation to grief in life is really just that constant movement between reminders of your loss, memories of your loss, and restoration toward the future and toward life and toward that identity change and the relationship changes that you're experiencing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let me give you this. I brought my little puzzle pieces to show you, if you could think, we think about it a little bit more like this. So there are a few key pieces that we'll want to pay attention to that will impact the grief experience. So the number one thing that we focus on is the relationship with the person. So back to Jay's point earlier, as you're listening to me, if you find the person that you care about that you're here to learn more for, or yourself, you can kind of adapt these a little bit. So I'm talking about bereavement, but even in a loss that's a living loss, these are the same. So what was the quality of the relationship with the person? That's a really big question. The more complicated the relationship, the more complicated the grief. And one of the pieces around the 5 stages of grief that can be really problematic is that some people experience relief when their person dies, but that's not in the 5 stages of grief. And so you can end up feeling like there's something wrong with your grief, or even guilty that you feel relief that the person has died. And that doesn't have to be just because the relationship was challenging. It might be because they suffered. And so relief's actually a really common experience in bereavement. So anyway, what was the quality of the relationship with the person? I think people are always surprised that this is where we begin. If someone comes to us for counseling, we actually don't start with like the hardest part of the story, maybe like the trauma of it, or there's some graphic parts of the death, but that is a piece of it. So the relationship with the person who died, and do we have enough information about what happened? The story of loss is what I call it, but do your kids, do they have enough information about how they got here? What happened? So they don't need details, but they do need developmentally appropriate, accurate information. Without that, our brains continue to try to fill in the blanks. It's just how we're wired. And so we want to give them as much information as we can. Again, don't need details, but you do need truthful information. And sometimes what I found is families, parents, caregivers assume that maybe what their kid is imagining is a lighter version of what happened, and it's almost always the opposite. What they're filling in the blank with might even be worse than what happened. And so that's really something to pay attention to. So another piece, let me find the one I really want, this one. Rituals and beliefs. What are the rituals and beliefs around death and grief for your family? And so rituals might be like, obviously right after death, that might be the funeral and the different rituals of mourning for your family, for your culture, those pieces. But it also means the beliefs around what happens after a person dies. So in bereavement, it is a spiritual conversation, but I often say you don't need to have spiritual beliefs. You actually just need to know what it is that you'd like to offer your kids and leave some space. One piece is, if you're talking about kids, they're very concrete thinkers. So the question really in a kid's mind is, where are they now? Literally. Where are they now? Literally. I need to locate them now. And so that's something that as adults we can sometimes skip over. It's okay if it's a belief about heaven, but you'd want to be able to talk about that and maybe be more concrete about that. What do you think's happening in heaven for that person? And also, where is their physical body? So were they buried? Were they cremated? These are some of the details that kids need to understand to locate where are they now. This allows that filling in of the blanks, that allows their systems, their minds, their hearts, their souls, to process grief and adapt and move between loss and the future, loss and restoration. Continuing bond, so staying connected to the person. What are the practices that your family has or that they have? They can be very small and simple. Sometimes, and again, if you're talking about kids, you want to think pretty literal and pretty tangible. I call it like almost like a linking object. That's one of my first questions. What do kids have that link them to their person? And because they're so concrete, it might be like, actually kids come up with the coolest things I would never. As adults, we come up with these. All the time adults want to say, let's have their ashes made into like a glass something. And it is cool. But the things kids really love is like their grandpa's old hat or their dad's, wrenches or something. Like it's not the things that we think that have meaning for them. And so asking kids is really important. One last thing just about continuing bonds I do want to pause and point out is not assuming that that's actually comforting, that ongoing bond. So we've shifted our perspective in grief over time to say, it used to be this idea that you should cut off and move on, and that was healthy. And now we understand that's not even actually possible, and that's not healthy grief. Healthy grief can remain connected to the person who's died, but so can cut off. So just like you might have to cut people out of your life as you live because they're not good for you, they're abusive, they're problematic, there could be so many different things in your own journey. So you can do that when someone dies. And at times, people need to do that, kids and adults. Usually what I say when we're talking about that with a kid is something like, I always add the word yet, or for now. For now, this is what you need. Because grief goes across the lifespan. So that's something really important to remember as we're thinking about kids and their grief. It goes across the lifespan, and I think if you're supporting a child who is grieving, this is one of the hardest parts. Because just as you, maybe adults especially, I see this start to kind of be processing and moving forward, and they're ready to move forward, their child comes to a new stage of development and has to think about their person and the death and themselves in a new way again, and it's kind of like opening up the wound. And that's tough for the caregivers or the parents who are doing that. So the continuing bond, it may or may not need to be nurtured. And then I want to add, like, the secondary losses is what we call them. That's the fancy word. I think of it like a ripple effect, in water. So the rock that goes into the water is the initial death, but there's all of those ripples that can sometimes actually become the main source of grief. So I support someone right now where his whole life's changed, the finances changed. He had to move to a new house, so he lost his school. So he doesn't have access to his friends. His entire world has changed. And actually that sense of who he is in his life and in his world is the bigger loss right now for him. Yes, he's struggling with the fact that his dad is gone, but all those other losses have such an impact. And so those ripple effects. And the last one is really the support and agency that that child has. So the support's around them, obviously, but then the sense of agency and control that they are allowed to have. So if there's any one thing that you take away from the conversation today, I would say, for me, I'm always looking for ways to offer kids, young people, agency over their life in grief. Because as you said, Kara, it's the club nobody signs up for. So nobody gets a choice. It's been stripped from you. And so it really does, for young people and adults as well, jeopardize that sense of like trust and security in the world and in yourself. And so finding places where kids have choice every step of the way. So when people ask me, and this might come up today, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? My first question is always like, have you asked them? Have you asked them? And so giving agency and choice back to them.
Thank you, Shanna. This is a lot more easy to understand and identify with, and it humanizes the journey a lot more than you should be in anger.
Yeah.
And why aren't you in negotiation yet? So thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to learn more. Is this accessible, these stages, on your website or in a handout that we could share with people? Just because I see a lot of value in these pieces together.
Great question. I don't know, let me tell you how these formed. I would call it a process. Can I say that instead of stages? A process. And this really originated out of when I joined the team. There were all these really skilled grief therapists, and I just went around with my little piece of paper like, what do you think the cornerstones of grief work are? What do you think the cornerstones of grief work are? And then I was pulling together those pieces, and now I've done it long enough that these have solidified for me. So this is typically how I do it. It's in lots of presentations. I don't mind sending you a slide, and you can share out a slide that has these on it. This is a really helpful way, as you said, I love that word, to humanize and to individualize what it means to be a grieving person, because it's different for everybody. So,
And I feel from oh yes, go ahead, Jay.
Sorry.
Oh, this is why we're here.
Couple thoughts. Years ago, I had a girlfriend, and her mom crashed into a tree, and none of the kids wanted to talk. I spoke at the funeral, and at first I was resentful, but then I recognized everybody grieves differently. My mom passed away last August, and my dad passed away 13 years ago, and I actually grieved my dad more when my mom passed away. And then Hannah, my daughter, she's 13, we made this poster and to recognize my mom, my dad, my brother, who I don't like, my sister, me, all the grandkids, and some memories. And I felt like, and Hannah's very artistic, but she's like, Dad, this isn't very good. I go, no, it's perfect. And it was a way for her and I to grieve. Like, my mom had dementia, so Hannah got kind of the grumpiest part of my mom, and my sister, my brother had nothing good to say about her, and I don't think that's fair either. But Hannah, I honestly think my mom was trying to stay alive till Hannah graduated, but she never made it. But no, she loved it.
Jay's talking about something that is so important, actually, that in grief, the number one question or comment that parents often ask is something like, they're not talking about it, so I'm really worried. You were talking about they didn't want to speak at the funeral, but in general, they may not have wanted to talk. And so how do I support someone, a child who's not wanting to talk? And I always say, the number one question for me is, were they a big talker before the death? Is that how they process stressful situations for themselves before? And it sounds like your daughter Hannah she's creative, right? And so that is a way she processes her world. And so there's something called the basic pH model. I love it. It's super accessible. It's easy to think about. We all already get it, which is like we're all kind of differently talented and we process the world in different ways. Some of us are a bit more creative. Some of us are more cognitive. Some of us are more physical. There's a more kinesthetic quality to how we move about the world. Some of us are more emotional, right? You can kind of go down that. And I love that it's called the basic pH because we all need all of those to have healthy pH, if you will, to have a healthy balance of a self in our life. But we do have kind of dominant ones, just based on our personalities and how we're wired. And so it sounds like Hannah's is more creative. And what a good example of allowing her to use that to process grief. So when people say, my kid's not talking, I have two pieces. It's like, were they talkative before? Is that how they process grief? If not, I'm not worried, right? But are they processing the world and their grief in the way they did when they were stressed? That's usually my prompt is like, how did you notice when they were stressed before they processed that? So if a kid is really kinesthetic, and boys often get put in this boat, but girls do it too. So if you're really energetic and you're, kind of like a full physical person, I'm going to expect in grief to see a lot of slammed doors. I'm going to expect to see more fights at school. Like I'm going to expect that because they're processing through their body and their energy. And in a case like Hannah, if they're processing like by writing or something creative, like those are great. The other piece that parents say is they haven't cried since the death, but like, okay, were they a big crier before? Because if they weren't, I'm not going to expect to see that. That doesn't necessarily mean they're healthily processing grief, right? And so just, it gives us a chance to back up. I think grief really puts, like, it feels like all the chips are on the table, like it ups the ante. But if you kind of back up and think, you know this kid, you know this family, you know this kid. And so how did they navigate the world before? If they're really far off their baseline, that's when we'd want to be concerned. But if they're finding ways to process that's natural for them, it may not be talking, that's so neat. And then the other question that I have if kids don't want to talk, or people don't want to talk, is, and I have to borrow this from a mentor of mine named Bob Niemeyer, but this is his question. And he says, tell me the benefits of not talking. Because we're always kind of biased that talking is the best way to go. But it's like, tell me what's really working about not talking about this. And I want to understand that. And I'm not asking the question to get to where I want to go. I really want to get it. What's working for you? And for many people, it's like, I don't upset my caregiver. Or I don't feel the intensity of grief if I'm not talking about it. So there's other ways to process it. And so I want to hear, like, what's working about that? And then are there any risks to not talking that we haven't thought of? Are there any drawbacks to not sharing about your grief? What I have found is if the benefits, the pros of not talking are really outweighing the cons, there's nothing you're going to do that's going to convince a kid or a person to start talking. So we really want to acknowledge that. Did you have something? Yeah.
Just as info, what I've noticed with mine too, sometimes it's a time frame. They may not do it that year. It may take a year or two for them to actually let it out. I noticed my youngest struggled a lot later on after it, and he started grieving 2 years later after that. And that's how he processed his. It started with, it almost seemed like denial, but not, where it was, no, they're still here, but they're actually not with you. And it took a bit for it to actually, for him to start processing.
Absolutely. And, you know, you just kind of hit on that developmental piece of across the lifespan. So as he got a little older, he also was developing and thinking about things differently. I would even say that as he developed, he got more language. That's a part of our brain development, right, which is happening over time. So I don't know how old your son was at the time of the death or at the time he started processing.
9 years old.
Yeah, 9 years old. And it makes sense that, you know, the 5 stages of grief are there for a reason because they are common experiences of grief. And so that sense of denial. I would also add that a lot of times adults miss validating what kids' grief is because they move, that movement I talked about before about like life and future and reorientation and the loss and grieving and what looks like a lot of sadness, they can move quite quickly between the two. So if you've ever watched a kid, you're like, okay, wow, this really went within 12 seconds. You know, they went from like sad and crying or talking about their person to going out riding bikes with their friend and looking like nothing's wrong. And so because of that movement, people can think kids aren't really grieving or that they're not getting it. But actually, it's just a really healthy movement. And then like for your son, as he came to a new stage of development, that makes sense around 11, their brains are developing in a way to see the world differently, see themselves differently. And so you have new questions about your person, you have new questions about yourself and about death. And especially as they come into adolescence, they're going to start asking more existential questions about like God and the world and purpose and like goodness and all of those things. And if they've had a experience of a death, whether it was traumatic or not, those questions get asked again. And so I don't know how old your son is now.
He's 11.
Okay, he's 11 now.
This year, yeah.
Okay, so you know, it doesn't make doing this process pointless. It's just a building off of, right? But when he's 16, you may have a new experience of grief again, or when he's 20, or in my case 45, or whatever.
So, my son lost his grandfather, but we weren't super close with them. We would see them like once, maybe twice a year. And my husband's relationship is really, really strange because there's like a lot of baggage there. And he told me like a couple of years after he died that he really missed him, which seemed really odd to me because they weren't close at all. And he probably hadn't seen him for like a year or two before he died. it seems odd that somebody who's so disconnected from our lives would be something that would elicit such a strong reaction.
A couple thoughts come to my mind about that. One is, how old is your son?
He just turned 11.
He's 11. A couple thoughts come to mind. So one is thinking about those ripple effects. And so thinking about the change to your family as a whole, not just your nuclear family, but like your husband. You know, when his dad died, how did that?
His stepfather.
Okay.
And his mom remarried when he was an adult.
And how did, so I'd be so curious if I was sitting with, you know, your family, it would be like, tell me about how your stepdad maybe mitigated or like buffered your mom.
Well, that wasn't a very good situation either. Like his parents took his mom and his stepdad took him to court. So just to give you like,
It was
it
complicated.
was very complicated.
Yeah.
And so his stepdad did not accept him at all. And he was not a big fan of his stepdad either. So their relationship only just kind of became more tolerable in the last, like, probably last 10, maybe 15 years. So probably since my oldest was born, she's like 17.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes it's because of the way I say grief changes the shape of a family. So sometimes it's that. And what kids are articulating missing is the shape of their family that might have changed and that looks different from people around them that they wish they had. Sounds like that's not the case for your son. Another piece that sometimes comes up, kids will express grief, feelings of grief where it feels like this seems really disconnected. I don't understand how that connected to this situation we're currently in. What I have found, and I mean, I don't know your son, so I don't totally know, but I have found that sometimes expressing it as grief is a way that kids say, this is a really intense feeling for me. And the closest they've ever gotten to some of those really intense feelings is after a death. And so that's possible, but I would also just wonder if what's missing is like the kind of family relationships that he wishes he had. Because he's at 11, right? And he's a young man, he's a boy. Yeah. So he's looking at himself in this way, right? As a boy who's coming into he's coming into his beginning to launch. 11's adolescence, right? So in his conceptualization of what does it mean to be a boy and connected to family, like we're not very good at that in our society here, right? To stay linked in family. Other cultures do this so much better than most Western cultures, but
Also, the big grief thing for them is we moved from Kimberley, BC here, and they didn't really get a chance to say goodbye. And we lived right above the bakery that we owned and where we worked. And so we had way more family time. And so that is their big piece of grief that they usually talk about. And that's kind of what I'm trying to deal with. But it might be connected to that as well.
it might be connected for him, right? He connects this piece. I don't know when you moved. I don't know how it was connected to the death or anything like that. But yeah, that loss of family time, the changing shape of family. And for him, sometimes it doesn't always make sense to us how kids connect it. There may be, that's a really insightful thing. This is the cool thing about counseling. It might not that we're counseling, but this is what I love about counseling. I just asked you questions and you came to your own brilliant insight on that, which was like, it's probably that is really the heart of it for your kids, so.
My dad died 4 months before Hannah was born, and I reference him as her papa, but she never met him, and I don't know if that's healthy. I think it is, but I don't know.
Absolutely, if you want a short answer. Yes, it's totally healthy. Again, this comes back to Western culture. We're not really good at staying linked to people throughout generations. But many other cultures do this, right? Where there is a legacy of connection and an ancestral acknowledgement that we don't do very well, but it actually roots us.
Like, we have a picture of him, so that's how she knows him.
And she knows him through your stories, right? She knows him through your stories of who he is. Does she have a firsthand memory? No. But like, my kids don't have a firsthand memory of my brother, but I've brought him forward in our lives. And so that is a way that people live on, actually.
This is his ring.
You're actually a perfect, you could run the session actually, because you're a perfect illustration of some of these things. That's a linking object that you have that's part of your continuing bond with your dad. And then part of the continuing bond that goes on is that you share with your daughter who he is, right? One thing I'll say, if I can add on to this, is in death and in bereavement or grief, after a death. So that's the bereavement part is grief after a death. But there's other kinds of grief, like we were talking about before. It is a natural tendency, and our society does this quite a bit, where we sanctify people after they die. And we only tell the best parts of their life and the great stories. And those are welcome. Those are great. And also, I encourage parents to allow for the whole picture of the person. So I always think of, I was born in 1981. So in the 90s, there was I'm from the States, as I said. So there's all these poster boards, like those poster people of Michael Jordan. That's what I always think of. I don't know who you guys had here. Was it like Wayne Gretzky? I don't know. Maybe I'm stereotyping, but you know what I'm talking about. Like at an athletic store, there'd be like that poster person. And when we only tell the positive stories, that's what we do. We give a cardboard cutout of the person, and real people are flawed. And when we talk about the whole person, we allow kids to be a whole person too. They're also going to make mistakes. They're also going to do cool things. And so, again, doing your own work, tending your own story about a person so that you're not handing all your garbage. But it is okay for them not to have been perfect and to not paint them like a saint. And in fact, if you really want to connect with a young person or even another person on grief, I would suggest leaving space for that, because that's what makes them real and whole. And yeah.
And if I could be so bold, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming, Jay, that helps you with your journey of grieving as well, is sharing stories,
Yeah.
right? It's a beautiful full circle moment where you're sharing a memory, sharing the spirit, and in process you're healing in the journey as well. So thank you. We have talked a little bit, but I just want to give you an opportunity to cover any loose ends regarding healthy ways ways children can grieve. Is there any additional supports that we can give young people? And is there any behaviors that we should look out for to give us a heads up that maybe we as supporters could be doing more?
Yeah, or you want to reach out for extra help, right? So our perspective on grief, it always surprises people that as a grief counselor, I don't think everyone needs counseling for grief. It's just that our society is not too good at it. We're not too good at supporting grief, tending grief, making space to be witnessed, to be able to tell the stories of your person. And really, that's mostly what we need. We're not even very good at saying, tell me about what you loved about mothering your son. And I hear this from people who are grieving all the time, is that we don't want is for our person's name to be left in the silence. And Jay's really telling a really beautiful story about that, of sharing about his family with his daughter and making it alive for him too. You can never make grieving people more sad. And so to bring up their person is not going to make them more sad, but as a society, we're not really good at that. And so I think number one, it's to keep those conversations open, right? To have those conversations. If you're not comfortable or the people you're supporting aren't comfortable, I did bring one, and if we have time, I'll close my portion by reading you a little story time. But stories and books are a really great way to help kids find connection for their own grief in a story. And so, number one, that's just a great way to kind of keep that conversation open. But when it comes to things to pay attention to, I would say back to where we did cover it a little bit about pH, like what is their natural way of processing stress in the world, but also how far off that do they seem to you? And you're going to be off of it a little bit. You know, grief makes your ability to cope with things smaller. That's nobody's done anything wrong. That's just the nature of it. And so how far off their baseline are they? For example, isolation and withdrawal can be something that we want to pay attention to, but it's also very normal in grief because the demand of grieving and the demand of life it's energetically so draining. And so physically draining, emotionally draining, spiritual, all of the things. And so a little withdrawal and isolation is actually very normal. But like, how long is this going on? So one thing I would say is, if you're talking about symptoms in the body or like anxiety or not eating or not sleeping, we want to say like, is there a steady improvement in those over time? So we would expect to see that be totally disoriented after a death. And so there's no concern there. That's normal. But is there slow and steady kind of movement and shift over time? How much time? Please don't ask me. Because everybody's so different, right? And unfortunately, there is a little bit more diagnosis happening around grief. But just to remember, if you ever hear that, that's really out of the States because they need that for insurance. It's really not for grieving people. So if you've heard of prolonged grief disorder, it used to be called something else before, it's really there so that clinicians like myself can offer support to people who are grieving, which is so sad. But so there's really no timeline for that. It's like, how much is this impacting your functioning in the world? And I'll add one last thing, which is around like behaviors that are a concern. So if a teenager or even a younger person, if there's some high risk behaviors, like we're going to want to pay attention to that. As an adolescent, you're going to be, what's really hard is this adolescence or is this grief? Because taking risks and having some high risk behavior is a normal part of being a teenager. And so like, how risky are we talking about? For example, like I've had young people who come in and they've I've learned to keep a pretty straight face, but something like, so I tried crack last week because, my dad died from an overdose. I just wanted to feel, what did he feel? And you're like, okay, yeah, okay. That's a high-risk behavior that we're going to want to pay attention to. That could lead to not good places for him, right? But I also totally get where he's coming from. So there's some high-risk behaviors like that. Or even, obviously, so I want to caution with this one. So obviously, suicidal thoughts or behaviors, like you're going to want to pay attention to it, but I also want to really emphasize that it is normal in grief. Especially for teenagers and adults to have a bleak sense of the future. You don't have access to what a future might look like. That's a normal part of grief, of having security disrupted, of having life disoriented, of the things that you would assume about the world that keep you safe and that you're going to go on with every day. That's broken. And so a bleak sense of what a future can be is very normal. And also thoughts of like, I think I'd rather not be here. And even for little kids. So a lot of parents are very concerned when a kid says, I'd like to die because I'd like to be with my person. And so that's very, very common. I'm not saying you don't ask a couple other risk questions just to make sure that they are safe, but it is a normal response for many people in grief. And a lot of people don't share it because it's kind of taboo. So very normal, very common. For kids, for example, a response to something like that doesn't have to be counseling. It can be, you might if it seems risky, but it can also just be a validation of a normalization of that. Nobody's ever done this before. The kids haven't done this before. The teenagers, maybe you haven't either. And so it's just normalizing. Like, yeah, I think that's a pretty normal response because what I hear you saying is you really want to go be with them. And I wish they could be here too, but they're not. And so, let's find other ways back to continuing bonds. Sometimes that happens out of not feeling a sense of connection in some other ways. So you'd want to build into that. So obviously some of those things, risky behaviors, and then as I said, like if it's not physiologically in their bodies, in their life, kind of improving. If school attendance does not get better over time, right? I mean, lots of kids don't go to school. There's no wrong way to do that. Some kids go to school day after a death. Some kids don't go for a month. Everybody's different. But, you know, is there, wherever their baseline is there steady shift and change? Does that make sense?
Thank you, Shanna. We have a couple more questions and then we'll open it up to the floor. I think this is, we can all relate as the adults in the room. Do you have any tips on how to support, how to navigate a conversation with a child when you are in a space where you're not ready to have a conversation and you're deep in your own grief?
Yeah, I always say parenting grieving kids while grieving is like a Herculean task, and I don't know if I've ever seen anything more monumental and challenging to do. So I think the first thing is it's okay to have containment around the ways you're trying to support your young person. So it's okay to choose not to do it sometimes. It's okay to say, actually, I would like to have this conversation with you, but I can't do it right now. Can I come back to you later today or later tonight? Now the piece is you got to go back. But it's okay to say, I actually am not in this space for that right now. Because it does a few things, but one of it also like gives kids permission to do that too. So you have to make sure you're not being a hypocrite also. Like, you're not always wanting to talk about it, so are you giving them space when they're not wanting to talk about it? But yeah, putting some containment around it. And most kids will bring this up at bedtime because their brains have slowed down, everything gets quiet, they're thinking about it, but you're exhausted. Like, you've just been through the whole day. So you also may not have space for that. And it's okay to not have some deep conversation about grief at the end of a day, but to say, you're gonna circle back. You offer soothing, you offer normalization, and then you're gonna come back at another time. But you're gonna commit to that together, and your kid's gonna know when you're coming back to that. That makes sense. Another thing I would say is, a lot of parents will wonder if they've communicated the information, when I said like the story of loss, if they've communicated that well, because kids keep asking the same questions over and over again. And that is normal. You haven't missed it. You haven't not explained it well enough. Like, that's part of their processing to make it make sense. And I would say, I call it's the reality testing of a death part. And adults do it in other ways too. And usually very weird ways. So I love when we have a group at our center because people feel safe to like say all the weird ways they've kind of reality tested if their person's really dead. And like for me, this isn't even that weird, but it would be like dialing his disconnected phone number for 6 months after he was dead, just to hear the like, this number is no longer in service. My system needed that to just keep being reminded that it was real. Kids are asking you repetitive questions. They're the same questions. They may be slightly different, but they're basically the same questions. So that's a piece. Just know that that doesn't mean you haven't gotten it right. So you just want to restate yourself. That can help you with your energy too. You don't need to find a new way to talk about it. You know, you could ask the child, like, I'm happy to keep talking about this, but like, do you have a different question, or is there something I haven't answered for you yet? But most likely, it's just they're just processing. And so part of your energy save can be not trying to come up with new ways to tell them. Another piece is to say, I don't know. So if you don't know the answer to a question they have, it's okay to say that, I don't know. But it seems like this is really important to you, so I'm going to try to figure it out and I'll come back to you. Can we do that? Yes. I had one more that I wanted to share about how to like have conversations and support your kids. I'm going to come back to the books. That is a really good way. It's a shared space. It's like not your personal self offering them the support technically. There's something about a book. And so you're offering them an echo about their grief. And even if kids read a story, or adults read a story, how many of you have read a story about grief and thought, that's not my experience? That's great, because you actually realize something about your experience, and it wasn't that. That's totally fine as well. So sometimes kids may read a story. You don't have to worry about it being the perfect story. It may be a story that they are like, well, that's not how it was for me. Okay, great, I wonder how yours was different. You could have a conversation. It's okay to set limits around the conversations and contain them. It's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to use other resources like books. Books are fantastic. The last thing I'll say is it's actually okay to use other people to support you with these conversations. That is a bias that people have. That's a myth about grief. Is it the best person to tell a child about what's happened or to keep having these ongoing conversations is the caregiver? The parent, the caregiver? It might be, and it also might not be, based on your ability to respond at that time. And it is okay to bring in and tag out with somebody who you trust, who's skilled, who has a relationship with the child. And I would encourage you to do it together, right? You could be in the room so everybody knows what we're talking about, but it's okay to lean on someone else who is a support for that kid.
Thank you, Shanna. That was awesome. To go back to the living loss, could you provide some support on how to engage in conversations about a living loss with a young person?
Yeah, I think it's actually not that much different than bereavement, because in a living loss or ambiguous loss, the term I was using, there's no resolution, right? I'll put the word closure there. There's no real closure. I don't know if there's actually closure in bereavement either, but there's less closure in an ambiguous or a living loss that is ongoing. It doesn't have an end. It's still really some of these same pieces. And I think about the questions that kids in care have, which is, how did I get here to this place? And it's the same as the story of loss. So what happened to bring me here? So what happened to that person? What happened in the life of our family? What happened for us to be in this place so that I can figure out what has been lost to me as I go on, right? So there's the how did we get here? What do I not have access to? What is lost to me? So it can be grieved, actually. And, we just said, Jay's great example, and many of us here, that grief's ongoing across the lifespan. A living loss is still going to be the same. And so it's still going to require some tending. It's still being embroidered in your story. The threads are still there. You can't snip them. But the same in bereavement. You can't just snip them off and keep embroidering something else. So it's really about how are we gathering up those threads of living loss, acknowledging them. That's part of how did we get here. Acknowledging them, pulling them together, and then stitching them into the story that we're still making. And so for a kid, practically, or for us, that's how did I get here? What's been lost to me? How will I get to the future that I want? And so for some people, it's I actually don't know the future that I want. And if you're even if you're in your middle years and you lose a partner, the future can look pretty bleak, pretty unknown, because the plan was to stitch that forward together. And so it is about figuring that out too, whether that's from a traumatic brain injury or dementia, some pieces like that, or someone's missing. That's another way of having a living loss. If you have, you had mentioned before about your son who didn't have an ongoing relationship necessarily, but there's an assumption sometimes for young people that because maybe the person wasn't consistent in their life or they were absent a lot, that the grief should be less, but sometimes it's more. And so just not making those assumptions, but figuring out, how did I get here? What's been lost to me? Where do I want to get to? And what am I going to need? What extra supports am I going to need? Which is one of the cool things that your organization, is able to focus on and support people with. So,
thank you. I'm going to try and tie these two into the story as well. What are some lower cost resources would you suggest for families experiencing loss and grief? And what would one tool be that you would hope people to take away from today's session?
Okay, on the costs piece, I would say a couple of things. So just to back up, as I said before, not all grief needs counseling. So if we can have people around someone who's had a death who can witness them, who can ask good questions, if you even probably feel that land in your own body, if you in your own loss, if you could be witnessed, if people would ask you questions, tell me what it was like to be their sister. Tell me what it was like to watch them play basketball, tell me, living questions actually about the person who's gone. That brings them forward because they are still alive in the person, right? So not all grief needs counseling, but sometimes we're not too good at it as a society. But if you can find a network, then that's amazing. So I'll say two things. So for us at the Children's Grief Center, I brought this to show you, and they're on the back. We're not for profit, and so our goal is not to make money. It's to be able to support the community and also to help build capacity in our community to be able to support grieving people. So we do a lot of presentations, a lot of community engagement pieces to create a more grief-informed city, actually, so that your response with others is improved. But when it comes to, low-cost counseling is a piece that's available. It's on a sliding fee scale. I didn't bring those. We don't means test. It's not an honor system. It's on an honor system. We don't means test. So there's a sliding fee scale of like no fee to the regular fee for counseling. And we have everybody across the board that comes. And I will add, so there's a wait list. We do have a wait list. And right now I think that's at about 4 months, which is actually pretty good. There's other ways if someone's needing support right in the moment that our intake coordinator can support that. But one of the things that we've done is we've created a caregiver and parent information series that addresses the main questions that parents are always asking us. Many times parents are coming for those initial appointments, or they seek counseling because they're just like, I just need to know my kids are okay. Or I just need like a few tips, like I've got this, but I just want to make sure that some of these things are going well. And so they're free. The first one is always, so they run in a series of, 3 for the Children's Grief Center, but there's also one on how to talk with kids about advanced illness. So it's before a death. But the 3 that we run are common responses to death and how to support kids with that, kids and teens. The second one is supporting children and teens after a sudden death. We chose sudden death on purpose so it's not a traumatic death because, honestly, sometimes a sudden death isn't traumatic and vice versa. So it's after a sudden death, or you can think like a traumatic loss. And then the last one is how to stay connected. What are some ideas and rituals for staying connected to the person who's gone? So we do quite a bit of these pieces that you don't actually need to be coming for counseling for. You might just need a community of people around you who get it. So the other piece is we have like something called the Village and the Hangout, and those are like drop-in groups with families. We're not like talking about grief. There's nothing like this, but people just come together, they understand each other, they have different losses, but kind of same inner landscape at this time. And the makeup of all the families is impacted, which, when you have lost someone in your family, you go out to like a school event and there's the full intact families, and you don't have that, you feel it. And so there's something really cool about that at the Village or the Hangout too. So those are like, you can go to the website, those are free, those are drop-in. I think the last one they did was like an escape room, laser tag, stuff like that. So those are about community versus counseling. So both of those are available. And then for adults, so for us, we see people with children, obviously, mostly children and teens, at times parents to support the kids. But for adults who don't have a kid connected to them, so Alberta Health Services, Recovery Alberta, has the Bob Glasgow Center. So that's the adult bereavement service through AHS. But that also has it does have like a 10-month wait list, just so you know. So I think you're required also to be 3 months out from the death before you get on their list. So
Thank you. Is there any questions from the audience?
So my daughter is 12, and she's really struggling because she had a best friend in Calgary when he was still there, and she's been talking about it constantly, and she's been really withdrawn. But she's 12, and she's also going through like all the hormonal stuff, and I remember I kind of went through that when I was her age, and her older sister did. And there's like a history of depression in the family. And so how do I know when she's withdrawing, what the difference is? If it's just her being that age and going through all that stuff, or her trying to still deal with that loss and that change?
it's such a good question. I always call it the $1 million one. What's grief? What's not? Like, what's development? What's just this kid? What's grief? I mean, how do you know? Your first question was, how do you know? And I can come back to that, but I would first think, how do you respond? That's actually where I go to, is you might not be able to know. And so we can't always be able to get, if your daughter won't talk to you, for example, about it, or she doesn't herself fully understand, you may not get to, quote, know. So then how do we respond? And I think of it as, we're going to respond to distress without always knowing the roots. So if you know your daughter and you're concerned about withdrawal, then you're going to respond with empathy and attunement to your child's withdrawal. Does that make sense? It's like, that's just a signal of distress, perhaps. Now, when it comes to the developmental question, I think it's worth naming for your daughter. I'm concerned. I notice that you are like in your room more, and I know you are feeling down and you're missing your friends. And so I think this is something that it can be normal for your age, because truthfully, there's something really important about closing your bedroom door and starting to separate a little bit from your parents and just like getting your own sense of who you are, your own thoughts, your own feelings. And that door is shut for a reason, so that you kind of get that sense and experience of yourself. How often is it shut? For how long? What are your worries about that? And having a conversation with her, because you may be noticing, your kid best, so you may be noticing some of this secondary impact, if you will, the ripple of the loss of friendship. And at her age, that's actually really important. So, is there anything in the way of forming new relationships that's leading her just to withdrawal? Because sometimes, whether it's into video games or whether it's into isolation, sometimes if your world's not working, those are comforting places to be. And I don't think that we're trying to push kids out of their comfort zone, but we want to understand, why is it so painful to be existing with others? Yeah.
And then I just had a follow-up. She's expressed a couple of times that she doesn't want to be a burden because of all of the other chaos going on in the house.
Yeah.
How do I've told her, I'm like, it's never a problem if you want to talk to me, but how do I actually reach her and help her?
It's so I have a slide when I do presentations that says you're never a burden, because this is a common concern for kids, and really empathetic kids who are paying attention to the world around them in their house, right? And so you said I keep telling her, which is brilliant, and also you might have to show her versus tell her. She's not taking it in, right? She's reading every other signal. And so what I would do, and this is just a suggestion, take or leave, but by showing her, I'd carve out the time where you're the initiator and not her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have been doing that.
Great. And then just keep doing it, because she's not going to trust it, most likely, right? It's yeah, I know my mom's doing this because she knows I'm not doing too well. But no, I actually want to be with you, And is it just you, or does she need connection with other people too? This is the cool thing about why we do the hangout. The hangout's for teens. The village is for parents and with littler kids. And it's so that there's a sense of connection. And sometimes, at that age, it is us. I'm not saying it's not adults and not their family. Of course it still is. But also some other pieces. And so especially if it's hard at school for her right now, or she's lost friends in a friend group, that's a hard age right now with friends. It's really tough. So I would initiate it. I would keep initiating it. And then just see, are there a few things? But again, I come back to if there was one thing that I hope people take away, it's find a way to ask them. They often have solutions we'll never think of.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Yeah, so my sister is 15. I lost my husband about 3 years ago, tomorrow actually. And then my mom died 5 months after he died. So there was a significant amount of loss. I'm widowed with 3 children, but I've taken on my sister in my house because my dad is really struggling, I would say, to be the dad and be in charge. But I feel really needs counseling and needs the support, because I can't be that for her. Even though I've kind of taken on that mother kind of role, but I'm also her sister. So how she feels like she doesn't need it. She told me, no, I don't need therapy because it makes you cry all the time, and I don't want to do that.
She's been to bad therapy,
Yeah.
but okay.
Like, and also she's embarrassed by everything, so
Yeah.
it doesn't take much. But how do I encourage her to do that? Like, obviously you can't go to therapy if you don't want to be there. How can I help her, support her to get to that point?
For me, this is a really easy answer, which is very similar to what I responded to here, which is you would probably have to do it with. We often want to do things for or to young people, but you're going to have to do it with as a beginning. Because also to go to counseling when you're a kid, to be sent to counseling is like you have a problem. Versus like, hey, we're all kind of struggling how to re-navigate and renegotiate this thing. Let's go together. So we see families, we see siblings together, we might see people on their own, we might see parents and kids together. I think that's one of the unique things, and you could offer her that, like, about doing grief support, is that it is very different from other counseling. It really is focused on how is what's been lost shaping you? How has it changed the shape of your family? And how do you want to go forward with it? It's really focused on that. It's not focused on a problem mentality, if you will, that a lot of counseling feels like it is. But you might have to do it with, to say, like, this isn't because you can't figure it out. It's because we're doing this together. Yeah. Can I take 3 minutes and read my story? Yeah. Can we have story time before you go? Okay, so usually I love to play this on an actual, there's a wonderful, Sounds True made an amazing illustrated version of this with a kid reading it. So if you just Google My Big Dumb Invisible Dragon by Angie Lucas, you'll find a fantastic video resource on that. And kids, like, you can share it with the kids in your world, you can share it with the adults in your world. And so I'm gonna read it to you as we close up, if you can give me a couple extra minutes. Have you ever seen an invisible dragon? Neither had I. But one day last May, a giant one swooped in and landed on my head, right on top of my head. It was the day Ollie's mom came to get us from Turtle Hill Park instead of my mom. She had a funny look on her face, and she opened her mouth 3 times before any words came out. I don't know if the dragon rode to the park with Ollie's mom, or if he was already there hiding in the trees. All I know is I didn't see him coming, and once he was there, he would not go away. Thanks. Dad and I had to get used to making dinner without Mom. We had to get used to how quiet it was in the car without her singing along to the radio. We had to get used to movie night without her famous peanut butter popcorn. But that big, dumb dragon didn't even notice. He moved right in and made himself at home. He curled up on my chest every night when I was going to sleep. I swear, he must have weighed a ton. He made it super hard to get out of bed in the morning. At school, he cast a ginormous shadow that followed me everywhere. And if you think it was easy to stand up straight with a dragon on my head, let me tell you, it wasn't. I think he's the reason some kids didn't talk to me anymore. Some days I ignored him. I pretended he wasn't there at all. I played hard and laughed like crazy, even louder and crazier than before, but that didn't make him leave. Other days I got angry. You can't believe how mad I got. I yelled and shouted at him, at everyone. What did that dragon do? He put on his headphones and tuned me out. There were also days when I'd reach up and pull his big, heavy wings around me. I would curl up like a caterpillar and hide away for hours. It wasn't always so bad to have him around. Still, almost every day I tried to make a deal with him. If you'll just get lost, I'll never say a bad word ever again, I told him. I thought maybe if he left, things could go back to the way they were. But he didn't seem to care what I wanted, not one bit. Then one day, when the sky was filled with cotton candy clouds, Ollie invited me back to the park. I made myself roll and cartwheel and race down Turtle Hill, just like before. I ran so blazing fast that my hair stood straight up like uncooked spaghetti, which made Ollie giggle. Then something happened that I wasn't expecting at all. For the first time in months, I forgot all about my dragon. When we ran out of breath, we flopped down on the grass and took turns spotting shapes in the clouds. I see a giant octopus, I said. Does that look like a chicken to you? Ollie asked. There's a pig, or is that a bear? I asked. That one kind of looks like a dinosaur, Ollie said. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's a dragon. I don't know what that dragon saw up there in the clouds, but after that day, he started soaring even higher and staying away longer. He often disappeared during gym and recess. Sometimes he'd even miss a whole soccer game. Once he was gone for an entire weekend. But he came back just in time for my birthday party. I tried all of my tricks to make him go away. Skedaddle, vamoose. What do you think he did? He put on a rainbow-striped hat and stayed for the party. I finally just gave him a piece of my birthday cake. That night, as I waited for sleep, which can take a while when there's a big dumb dragon in your bed, I realized something. My dragon didn't feel as heavy as he did back when I was 6. I guess my birthday wish came a little bit true. Hey, remember when I asked if you have ever seen an invisible dragon? That was a silly question. You can never see one by looking straight at it. You have to look at the person underneath. As we go, I just want to, there's so many pieces about that story that are true for kids, and I just want to encourage you, because you're here on a Saturday morning, because you love the people you know who are grieving, or you yourself are navigating it, that there is an idea out there that grief grows smaller over time. And I would say that grief stays the same size, and we grow large around it. And so that's how I see the work of caring for ourselves and also kids in our world who are grieving. It's what are we doing just to help their container, to help them grow large around loss, to help it feel a little bit smaller because they've grown large. And so to me, that's the work of supporting like grieving kids and families.
Thank you. Books are the best vessel for any type of conversation. So please don't be shy. Feel free to take a picture of these. We also have a couple books at the back for some recommendations for having conversations with little ones. Also, Shanna has left her handbills back there, so please help yourself to any type of resources or information. The contact information for Hospice Calgary is located on there as well. Shanna and I will be hanging out afterwards if you have any questions. But before I formally wrap up today's Coffee and Conversations, I just have a couple thank yous and shout outs to people. So first and foremost, Shanna, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
It is it's an important topic, a heavy topic, but it's also a beautiful topic. So I just appreciate you extending your knowledge and gratitude for coming here and connecting with all of us. I'll give you there's some leaky flowers.
Thank you. Oh, that's great.
Thank you. We also have some volunteers that are celebrating some important milestones with us. I sadly think a couple have already left. So Melissa, come on up. We're celebrating your 1 year with us. Thank you. I want to apologize. My notes are all out of whack. And Lindsay, is Lindsay here? Yeah. No, but you're a volunteer.
Oh, yeah.
Who's been with us for 1 year?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so
Is it 1 year already?
yes, same with Melissa. So,
I didn't know we were here yet.
thank you. Yes. And then I believe Amber and Dan, who were unable to stay till the end because we ran a little late, they have also celebrated their 1 year. Is Sally here? She has celebrated 4 years. I'd also like to ask Pat and Roz to come up. Collectively, these two volunteers have volunteered over 25 years with Big Brothers Big Sisters in our Between Generations program, as well as a Big Pen Pal program. So please come on up. I'll come to you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks, sweetie.
Thank you. Pat used to work with my sister. So to go back to your comment, Jay, on my way here, so my little girls never met my sister who passed away when I was 19.
Yeah.
And I keep her story alive in my conversations. And on my way here, I said, you're gonna meet Pat, who knew Auntie Tanya. So it's a beautiful full circle moment that organically happened because the universe made it happen, in my opinion.
It's funny because I have a friend whose dad passed away,
Yeah.
and I was the only person not part of the family to speak. And my mom was like, "Why are you taking Hannah to the funeral?" I go, "It's life."
Yep.
And she stood right by me, you know, when I spoke. And she was 6, and I think it's important. Like
It's part of life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I have one last final request. We are going to hand out a survey based on today's topic and experience. There's also an opportunity to provide feedback on future coffee and conversations. If you're interested in being entered into a draw to win a pass to the military museum for up to 4 individuals, please feel free to leave your name on the survey. Otherwise, it is anonymous. If you don't feel comfortable completing the survey, that's okay as well. Once again, thank you so much for coming out today and for providing us, for being vulnerable to ask questions on a sensitive topic. And that's always close to our hearts.